Are you a writer whose mind is a whirlwind of creativity and distraction? Hello, and welcome to Writing While Distracted, the writing podcast that helps you transform your scattered thoughts into literary brilliance. I'm your host, Brenda Murphy, and your NeuroSpicy writing coach. For writers of all kinds, but particularly those dealing with distraction and mental health issues, on this podcast you'll hear positive advice for staying focused amidst the chaos of your mind, along with writing tips to help you find your story's beginning and use your strengths to get to the end of your novel. Here, creativity thrives in the midst of chaos. Join me today as we talk about the 11 steps to writing your novel. Today's podcast is going to be a little bit more nuts and bolts on how to write a book. There are numerous books and articles that list steps for writing a novel, and many of them, while well-meaning, simplify the process to the point of being unrealistic. Going forward, I'm going to lean into the more technical steps and offer suggestions for accomplishing those steps in the fiction writing process. Some of the steps will overlap with nonfiction and memoir, and I'll point those out where they diverge and offer practical tips for neurodivergent folks. So this is my list of steps for writing a book. And keep in mind, this is my list. Your list may and will vary once you finish your first book. For most writers, their process evolves over time as they test and refine their methods and as they improve at their craft. The most important step of all is to start. Start writing and working on your book. Experiment and try different approaches. Keep what works for you and disregard the rest. This will seem like a short list, but each step in the list is a project itself. Going forward, I'll explore each of these steps in future podcasts. I'll have a link in the show notes for a PDF copy of these steps that you can download for free. Step 1, the idea. This is the kernel of thought that grows into a novel. It can be anything: an overheard sentence, a fragment of a song, a video clip, a person you see or meet, or a dream, anything really. The ideas I've found most worthwhile to investigate and expand on are the ones that stick around. Keep a small notebook or other means of recording these snippets of ideas so you never run out of things to write about. Now, for neurodivergent folks, the idea of running out of ideas is bizarre. For most of us, we will never live long enough to write about all of the random ideas that fly through our heads on any given day. The problem for us is to figure out which of those ideas that seem amazing whenever we think them to focus on and to write about. And that's what we're going to cover in step 2, expansion of the idea. And this is where you take the time to work through your initial thoughts and ask what-if questions. You take the time to identify and create your main characters. Now, some folks get bogged down here, deciding they don't know enough to write about their idea, and they spend all of their time doing research for their novel instead of writing. Before you spend weeks, months, and years researching your novel, remember that novels are ultimately about people and their interactions. And no matter what type of novel you're writing, you need to understand your people. So do enough research to get started to give you a rough idea of what details you may need to add later on in revisions. But set a time limit for your research and stick to it. You can come back later and fix things during revisions. Don't waste and give away all of your writing times to research. You don't need to know enough about a particular time period or a group of people or an occupation to write a dissertation on it. You only need enough to get started. Step 3, pre-writing. This is where you spend time getting to know the people that you'll be writing about and make decisions that will define your project. Take time to work through character worksheets and understand your character's reasons by completing inventories such as Deborah Dixon's goal, motivation, and conflict sheets. I will link to her book in the show notes, as well as Eileen Cook's book, Build Better Characters. Both of these books are excellent resources for understanding character creation and development, and understanding how your character's behavior impacts your story. There's a free download in the show notes for a character workbook that will get you started. Spend some time here plotting. Figure out where you want your story to go. Create a scene list or an outline to work from, even if you ignore it completely once you get started writing. If you ever get lost in your story, you have something to come back to get you back on track. Decide on the length of your story. Set a deadline for completing your first draft. This is super important for NeuroSpicy folks. Without a deadline, it is incredibly easy to become distracted by other projects. And if you're working on a project to submit for a specific call from a publisher or for a contest, it is essential you set a deadline for your first draft that's going to allow you time to edit it before you submit it. Always give yourself twice as long as you think you're going to need. If you're not working on someone else's deadline, set one for yourself. It's just as important because someday becomes never without a deadline. For folks who struggle with procrastination, which many neurodivergent folks do, having a deadline can push you to do the work you might otherwise put off. Treat a deadline you set for yourself with as much importance as a deadline you set with another person. Step 4. Write your first draft. Step 4A. Once you've completed your first draft, celebrate. And I'm serious here. You have done something that 80% of the people who say they want to write a book never do. You're in a very elite group of people who actually finish a first draft. So celebrate that accomplishment. Appreciate the work that you put into it. No, it's not ready for publication, and that's all right. You have time to make it ready for publication, but at least now you have something to work with. Step 4B. Set the draft aside for at least 1 to 2 weeks. Seriously, don't look at it. Some writers wait even longer, 4 to 6 weeks. I don't because I find it really hard to get back into my story if I do. Your mileage will vary with this, so try 1 to 2 weeks, and if that seems too short, add a week until you arrive at the right time for you. You want to be able to come back to your manuscript with a detached attitude, as if you were reading something someone else wrote. Step 5. Read over your first draft. Make revision notes about structure, dialogue, plot, character arcs, setting, and descriptions. Don't get overwhelmed with this mini list. I'm going to have podcasts that will address each and every one of those parts of the revision process, so stay tuned. Make a list of any research you need to do in order to fix things and add in details to make your story shine. Step 6. Revisions. This is where you actually fix all the problems from the first draft and refine your manuscript. It's the part I enjoy the most. You're going to use your notes to fix plot holes, to add or delete scenes, and to make sure your story makes sense, that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're going to correct repetitive words and phrases. You're going to add in or correct details from your research, and you're going to really take the time to make your story shine. You're going to attend to all of the pieces that make a finished novel. Step 6A. You're going to send your draft to beta readers if you're using them, or a copy editor if you're using one of those. Or sometimes they're called a developmental editor. The difference between a copy editor and a developmental editor are sometimes hard to discern. I've got a link in the show notes for an article about what the difference is between the different kinds of editors, and take some time to read that. It's got some really great information, and I hope it'll be helpful to you. While your work is out to them, you need to work on the next project, and that is actually step 6B. Start your next project. Why start the next project now? 3 reasons. 1, so you don't sit around and freak out about the what-ifs surrounding your book while it is out to your beta readers or your copy editor. 2, so that you can remind yourself that you're a writer and writers write. 3, once you have your book out on submission, if the publisher, acquiring editor, or agent replies, "I like this. What else do you have?" you'll be ready to take advantage of their interest. Step 6C. Review your beta readers' and editors' suggestions, recommendations, and change any of the things that you want or need to. Remember, this is your story, but you've asked people for their honest opinions. So take that into account, sit with their suggestions. Don't be thin-skinned here. This is the time to really evaluate your work and to be bold and objective about what things you cut out and what things you leave in. Trust your gut, but also respect other people's opinions. Step 7, edit your final draft. This is where you go through and you make sure that you've got words in place, that your periods are there, that it's grammatically correct, that you have complete sentences, that your dialogue makes sense, all of the things, that you've got quote marks, all the little things. This is what you do for your final draft. Step 8, read your book through from beginning to end one more time. At this point, I like to send it to myself in a different format, either a PDF file that I can review on my tablet, or I send it to my Kindle and read it there. Because you can make notations in both of those devices if you find things that you need to correct. And you will find things. Putting it in a different format than your word processing document makes those things that you've just glossed over or read over quickly pop out at you. You'll be so surprised at what you find. My other trick for this part, the making sure that you've proofed your book as best to your ability, is to start reading from the end of your novel and read one sentence at a time, going backwards. This is where you're going to find those errors that you missed because your brain filled in all the parts. It will feel like it takes forever, but it is a surefire way to make sure that you've done your editing to the best of your ability. Step 9. After proofing is complete, format your work for submission to a publisher, an editor, an agent. If you're an indie publishing person, this is when you format for the different vendors. Step 10. Submit to your editor, publisher, agent. Indie publishers, this is when you publish. There are more steps here for indie publishing folks and many amazing resources on the web for what they are. And I'll link to some of those resources in the show notes that I've found helpful for my work. If you are submitting to an editor, a publisher, or an agent, make sure that you follow their submission requirements. Nothing will get you booted out of the slush pile, of the to-be-read pile, quicker than if you have not followed directions. Have a friend look over your submission before you send it off to make sure that you've done everything that they've asked you. Don't short-circuit your chances of being accepted by not following directions. Step 11. If you didn't start your new project before, start it now. Again, you want to be ready if the editor, if the acquiring agent, if the publisher turns around and says to you, do you have more work? You want to be ready. You want to be ready to take advantage of their interest and the chances of having more of your work published. Now, this is not a definitive list, but it's a great place to start. And once you've written a book or 2 or 3, you'll create your own list and you'll have your own method of work. I asked the author Fiona Zed one time, what was the hardest book for you to write? And she said to me, the first one. And I've held on to that because it's the truth. The first book you write is the book that proves to yourself that you can actually write a book. And you don't know what you're doing, and you flail, and you try a bunch of different things until you arrive at a finished product. I'm trying to cut out some of that flailing here by giving you a list of steps and also providing some information in the upcoming podcast that will help you get to the end of your novel and have a polished piece to be able to send off to a publisher, to an editor, to an agent, or to put out in the world if you're going to indie publish. Treat this list as a way to get started and break what is a large undertaking into manageable stages, activities, and journey markers. The list focuses on the fiction writing process because most of the people who've asked for my advice or assistance with writing have been fiction writers. The list also focuses on folks who are planning to submit their work to a literary agent, publisher, or an acquiring editor. I have indie published only a small amount of my work, and I'm not an expert on the process. But the 3 links I have in the show notes have valuable information, and I encourage you to check them out. Writing a book is a marathon, and for neurodivergent folks, those of us with ADD, ADHD, and other mental health challenges, it can feel like scaling a mountain just to get yourself to sit down and write. Even if you don't struggle with organization, executive function, and motivation, writing a book is a big project. So many folks burn themselves out writing because they treat it like a sprint, where they give up before they start because they become overwhelmed with the process. My goal with this podcast is to get you to the place where you're ready to send off your polished, finished manuscript to a literary agent or an acquiring editor or a publishing house, or to have a manuscript you're proud of as an indie publisher. And again, in this episode's show notes, you're going to find a bunch of links to very helpful tools, websites, and books for you to explore. And I hope you'll check them out and start your writing journey today. Until next time, keep writing. Thanks for tuning in to Writing While Distracted, where we navigate the winding roads of creativity amidst the chaos of distraction. If you've enjoyed this podcast and found it useful, please share it and tag me. DM me and let me know what you found most helpful. Please leave a review. It really helps get the podcast in front of more folks. Remember, in the dance between focus and diversion, every stumble is a step closer to mastering the art of writing. Join us next time as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the writer's mind. Until then, keep writing, keep wandering, and embrace the distractions that fuel your creativity. Stay tuned, stay inspired.